The opening notes were soft, deliberate, and filled with a subtle power that immediately captured the audience. Unlike the pianist's flashy, dramatic approach, her playing was thoughtful and expressive. Each note was precise, yet it carried emotion that seemed to resonate with the space around her. People leaned forward instinctively, some closing their eyes, as if trying to absorb every nuance of the music. The hall, previously buzzing with expectation, became still. Held captive by the sound she created, her hands moved fluidly, shaping the music with confidence and grace. She varied the dynamics carefully, shifting from soft whispers to bold statements, letting each phrase tell a story. The audience could feel the emotion behind the notes, the struggle, the hope, the quiet determination that had brought her to this moment. It was music that spoke beyond technique, beyond performance, beyond applause. It was alive, and everyone listening sensed it immediately. The pianist watched from the side, its expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. He had been confident, certain that skill and precision would always command attention. Yet here was someone who did not rely on speed or showmanship, but commanded the room effortlessly through emotion and intention. He could not look away. His fingers twitched slightly, a subconscious reaction to the music, as if he wanted to intervene but understood instinctively that this was beyond competition. People in the audience began to whisper softly among themselves, some in awe, some trying to process what they were hearing. They had witnessed many skilled performances before, but this was different. This was music that felt alive, that seemed to touch the soul. They watched the young woman's hands move, saw the subtle shifts in her posture and expression, and felt the story she was telling unfold naturally as the performance continued. She drew the audience deeper into her world. Her playing was confident but unassuming, precise but not mechanical. She allowed herself to explore every nuance, to let each note carry weight, and to let silences speak as powerfully as sound. Every phrase seemed intentional, every pause meaningful. The energy in the room shifted, becoming immersive. The audience was no longer merely listening. They were experiencing the music, caught in a shared moment that transcended words. The pianist's confidence continued to erode. He realized that his previous assumptions about skill, dominance, and attention were incomplete. True artistry, he understood now, was not measured by speed or complexity alone. It was the ability to convey emotion, to make people feel something deep and real. And this young woman, so calm, so deliberate, so focused, had achieved that in a way he could not replicate. Backstage, other performers watched in quiet admiration. Some were inspired, others quietly awed, realizing that her approach to music was something rare and transformative. They whispered softly among themselves, careful not to disturb the spell that had fallen over the audience. Every note she played seemed to hold the room in its grip, drawing attention effortlessly, without the need for theatrics or display, as she approached the climax of her performance. The music grew in intensity, yet remained controlled, elegant, and deeply expressive. The audience could feel the layers of emotion, the careful shaping of each phrase, and the deliberate pacing that allowed the music to breathe. The final passages were not rushed. Each note lingered, echoing through the hall, allowing listeners to fully absorb the beauty and depth of what they were hearing. The pianist, watching closely, could not deny the impact. He felt something unfamiliar, humility, awe, and even a sense of challenge, but not in the way he had imagined. This was not competition. It was recognition of something profound, something he could not fabricate. Her performance was a reminder that mastery involved more than skill, that true artistry demanded heart, patience, and the courage to reveal one's inner world. When the last note faded, silence fell over the hall. The room remained still for a moment, as though no one could move until the music's presence had fully dissipated. Then, gradually, applause began soft at first, then building into a wave of admiration that filled the space. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, and some even whispering words of awe. The young woman rose from the piano with calm dignity, acknowledging the audience's reaction without exaggeration or flourish. The pianist, observing from the side, could not hide his astonishment. He had prepared countless pieces, mastered countless techniques, and yet here was someone whose playing surpassed him in a way he could not quantify. He had thought skill alone could impress, could dominate, could command attention. But her music had a life that his technical mastery lacked. It was not simply the notes she played, but the emotion, the intention, the narrative embedded within every phrase. For the first time, he realized that his approach, no matter how polished, left gaps that she filled effortlessly. People in the audience were leaning forward, eyes wide, some whispering in awe, others simply listening without words. There was a tension in the room, a quiet energy that carried through every note. The young woman's playing demanded attention, not through showmanship, but through honesty, vulnerability, and beauty. She did not pause to notice the pianist or the reactions around her. She was fully immersed in the music, allowing it to guide her fingers and convey her story. The pianist's expression shifted gradually. His confidence waned as he watched, his usual smirk replaced by a faint frown of concentration and disbelief. He had underestimated her presence, underestimated her skill, and underestimated the emotional depth she could bring to the piano. Every note she played seemed intentional, every phrase deliberate, yet entirely free from calculation. He realized that she had prepared not just technically, but spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. And that preparation gave her an advantage. No amount of skill alone could replicate. The audience remained silent during the final passages. Captivated by the way she shaped the music, her hands moved fluidly, her timing precise yet natural, her expression serene yet focused. The hall seemed to vibrate with the energy of her performance, each note resonating beyond the piano and into the hearts of those listening. People leaned forward, some whispering soft encouragements, others holding their breath in awe. When the last note lingered and slowly faded into silence, the room remained still for a moment longer than expected. No one spoke. The applause began softly, then grew steadily into a wave of appreciation and admiration. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and some wiping tears from their eyes. The young woman rose from the piano, calm and composed, acknowledging the applause with a small, graceful nod. She did not seek attention or accolades. She had spoken through her music, and that had been enough. The pianist remained seated for a moment, stunned. He could not recall a performance that had affected him so deeply. For the first time, he understood that skill without emotion, without depth, could only carry so far. Here was someone who had combined skill, preparation, and emotional honesty to create something truly unforgettable. He rose slowly, applauding, his usual confidence tempered by respect, perhaps even humility. People in the audience approached her afterward, praising her performance, expressing awe, and asking questions about her technique and approach. Some mentioned the pianist, noting the contrast between his precise but controlled playing and her expressive living music. She smiled softly, thanked them politely, and listened without arrogance or boastfulness. Her joy came not from the attention but from the knowledge that she had conveyed her story, shared her passion, and touched the hearts of those listening. Backstage, the pianist sought her out quietly. He did not speak immediately, simply observing her calm demeanor and the poise with which she carried herself. Finally, he said, "That was remarkable. I've never heard anyone play like that." His words were simple but carried weight. They were sincere, free of pretense, and reflected a shift in perspective. He had been humbled, forced to confront the reality that talent could take many forms and that confidence alone was not the measure of artistry. The young woman nodded, accepting the compliment without arrogance. She replied, "Thank you. I've worked hard, and I play the way I feel. That's all I can do." Her words were modest, yet they carried authority because they were true. She had not played to compete, to prove herself, or to impress anyone. She had played because music was her language, was her way of communicating something beyond words. In the following days, discussions about the performance continued. People who had been present could not stop talking about the young woman's playing. They compared it to the pianist, noting the difference between technical skill and true musical expression. They reflected on the way she had held the room, commanded attention without showmanship, and created an experience that stayed with them long after the notes had faded. The pianist, too, reflected deeply. He had encountered many musicians over the years, yet few had challenged him in a way that left him both in awe and reconsidering his own approach. He realized that confidence without humility could blind even the most skilled, that recognition of others' talent was not a threat, but an opportunity to grow. The young woman had taught him without intending to. That music was as much about the soul as it was about the fingers. And that humility was part of true mastery. The young woman, meanwhile, continued her journey with quiet determination. She returned to her piano, practicing, experimenting, and refining her craft. She understood that recognition could be fleeting, but the connection between music and emotion was enduring. She felt grateful for the opportunities to perform, for the challenges she had faced, and for the moments when she had been underestimated. For those moments had given her the strength to shine when it truly mattered. The night of the biggest performance yet had finally arrived. The hall was packed, larger than any venue the young woman had played in before. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their soft glow reflecting off polished wooden floors. The seats were filled with an audience that buzzed quietly with anticipation. Some were familiar faces, music enthusiasts who had heard of her previous recital, while others had come specifically to witness the renowned pianist who had built a reputation that preceded him. The young woman arrived early, as always, moving quietly through the backstage area. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the excitement and nervous energy of other performers. She had performed in front of audiences before, but this felt different. This was not just another recital. This was a moment where preparation, experience, and emotion had to meet precisely, and she was determined to be ready. She adjusted her posture, centered her breathing, and let her mind focus entirely on the music she would play. The pianist arrived later, as expected, and immediately drew attention. His confident steps, the flash of his polished shoes, and the sharp lines of his suit made him the center of many eyes in the room. People greeted him warmly, some bowing slightly in admiration. He allowed himself the satisfaction of the attention, moving toward the piano with the kind of assurance that comes from years of recognition. Yet, beneath his surface confidence, a faint awareness lingered. He had not forgotten the last performance, and though he would not admit it openly, a small part of him was curious, perhaps even unsettled by the young woman who had challenged expectations before, backstage. She observed him from a distance, but did not let his presence disturb her focus. She understood the tension that existed in the room, but she also knew that this was her moment to be fully present. To play not for approval, but for the music itself. She reviewed the pieces she had prepared, letting each one run through her mind carefully. The audience outside the stage waited, unaware of the storm of preparation, emotion, and tension happening just behind the curtains. When the pianist took the stage first, he performed with his usual precision and confidence. His fingers moved flawlessly across the keys, the audience captivated by speed, technical skill, and dramatic flair. He emphasized every note, exaggerating pauses and flourishes, making sure his presence was felt in every corner of the room. The audience responded with applause and whispers of admiration, and he smiled slightly, convinced that he had set a high standard that no one could surpass. Meanwhile, the young woman waited. She did not watch him with envy or competition. Instead, she observed thoughtfully, noting the audience's reaction, the flow of the music, and the atmosphere he created. She had learned to remain calm under pressure, to focus on what she could control, and to let her preparation carry her when the moment arrived. She adjusted her position, let her fingers hover above the keys, and drew in a slow, steady breath. She was ready. When she finally stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the audience. People had been anticipating her performance, curious to see if the previous recital had been a fluke or a true demonstration of talent. She did not rush to the piano. Instead, she walked with measured steps, acknowledging the audience with a calm, polite nod. Her presence was quiet, yet commanding. There was no need for showmanship. The anticipation itself became part of the performance. a silent tension that filled the hall. She seated herself at the piano, letting her hands rest gently on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, feeling the connection between herself and the instrument. She allowed herself to recall every hour of practice, every challenge overcome, and every emotion she had poured into her music. Then she began to play. People in the audience were silent now, listening intently, some with wide eyes, some leaning forward in disbelief. The whispers of doubt and curiosity from before had disappeared. The music filled the room completely, commanding attention without a single word. The young woman did not rush, did not hesitate, and did not falter. She played as though the piano and her own emotions were speaking together, telling a story only she could tell, and yet the audience felt every word. The pianist's confidence wavered. He had been certain of his skill, his control, his ability to impress. But here, in this small hall, he realized that there were things he had overlooked. Technique could be flawless, speed could be unmatched, but the soul behind the music, the emotion, the intent, the story was something that could not be measured or controlled. And in that moment, he began to understand that he had underestimated someone he had never even paid much attention to. The young woman continued, her music growing in depth and subtlety. She varied her tempo, played with dynamics that shifted effortlessly from soft whispers to bold statements, and let the silences between notes speak as loudly as the notes themselves. The audience was captivated. Some closed their eyes, feeling the music wash over them. Some leaned on the edge of their seats, drawn in by the honesty and beauty of each phrase. Even the pianist could not look away. He sat rigidly, absorbing the music, realizing that he had been unaware of what true expression could sound like as the final notes lingered. The room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. People were still suspended in the moment, letting the resonance of the piano and the story behind it settle into their hearts. Then, slowly, soft applause began, growing steadily as the audience realized what they had witnessed. Their initial curiosity had turned into admiration, respect, and wonder. The pianist finally exhaled, leaning back slightly, humbled in a way he had never been before. The young woman rose from the piano bench, calm and composed, acknowledging the applause with a small, graceful nod. She did not seek attention, she did not boast, and she did not rush. She had spoken through her music, and that was enough. The room had listened, and the silence of her preparation had transformed into recognition that could not be ignored. People began to approach her, complimenting her performance, asking questions, and expressing awe at what they had just experienced. Some mentioned the pianist, noting the contrast between his showmanship and her quiet, heartfelt expression. She smiled softly, thanked them politely, but remained focused on the music itself rather than the accolades. She knew that the moment had been more than just applause, it had been a turning point. A reminder that genuine talent and emotion could never be fully measured by skill alone. The pianist stayed nearby, his usual arrogance tempered by newfound respect. He had seen something in her that he could not ignore, something that challenged his own understanding of music and performance. It was a humbling experience, one that would linger in his mind long after the recital had ended. For the first time, he understood that confidence and technical skill were only part of the equation. True artistry, he realized, came from the heart, and it was something he had only just begun to comprehend. The young woman left the hall that evening with a sense of quiet fulfillment. She had played, she had shared, and she had transformed the room with her music. She had faced the challenge of being underestimated and turned it into an opportunity to reveal her true talent. And as she walked home through the cool evening air, she carried not just the memory of her performance, but the knowledge that patience, practice, and genuine expression could overcome even the most intimidating obstacles. After the recital, word began to spread quietly among local music circles about the young woman's performance. People talked in hushed tones, not wanting to exaggerate, but still unable to hide their amazement. She had done something unexpected, something rare. It wasn't just that she played well. It was that her music felt alive, that it seemed to speak directly to the hearts of everyone listening. Those who had been there could not stop talking about the way her fingers moved across the keys, the depth of emotion she drew out, and the surprising maturity of her interpretation. The pianist, however, reacted differently. For the first time, he felt a sting that had nothing to do with competition but everything to do with reality. He had been certain that no one in the room could rival him, and yet was someone who had captured the audience in a way he could not. He replayed her performance in his mind, remembering each phrase, each subtle movement, each note that had seemed to carry the weight of something more than music. It unsettled him. He had spent years building a reputation on skill, speed, and confidence. Now, he realized there were qualities he could not command or replicate, qualities that came naturally to others but eluded him entirely. The young woman, meanwhile, returned to her quiet routine. She did not bask in praise or allow herself to be carried away by the admiration. She knew that recognition was fleeting and that the real work was in preparation, in dedication, and in staying true to herself. She practiced daily, her fingers moving across the keys, exploring new pieces, refining her technique, and deepening the emotional resonance of her playing. Each day she felt stronger, more confident, and more ready for whatever challenge came next. One morning, she received a surprising message. Another performance opportunity had arisen, this time at a larger venue with more experienced musicians and a broader audience. The pianist was expected to be there, as he often performed at these events. She paused, considering the invitation. She understood the risk that being in the same space as the pianist might bring tension, scrutiny, and comparison. Yet she also recognized it as a chance, a moment to show not just her skill, but the truth behind her music. She accepted, feeling a quiet determination that steadied her nerves in the weeks leading up to the performance. She practiced with renewed focus. She experimented with tempo, phrasing, and dynamics, exploring ways to make each piece resonate more deeply. She imagined herself in the larger hall, the audience watching, the pianist observing, and she played through every possible scenario. Every mistake, every hesitation, and every moment of doubt became a lesson rather than a setback. She grew in patience and resilience, learning to trust her instincts and her connection to the piano. The day of the performance arrived with a sense of electric anticipation. The hall was grand, larger than any she had played in before, filled with people whose eyes were curious and eager. The atmosphere carried both excitement and tension. The pianist arrived first, as expected, his presence commanding the room even before he sat at the piano. People rushed to greet him, praising his talent and acknowledging his reputation. His confidence was visible, almost tangible. As he moved to the stage and prepared for his performance, the young woman arrived shortly afterward, quietly taking her place among the performers waiting backstage. She did not announce herself, did not seek attention, and did not react to the murmurs of recognition from those who remembered her from the previous recital. She focused on her own preparation, centering herself, adjusting her posture, and feeling the familiar weight of the piano keys beneath her fingers. She felt no fear, only calm determination. As the performances began, the pianist took his turn first. His playing was precise, flawless, and dramatic, with every note executed perfectly. The audience responded enthusiastically, applauding and whispering their admiration. He allowed himself a small, confident smile, as if to say that the evening was already his. Yet when he glanced at the young woman waiting backstage, he noticed her calm presence, the quiet confidence in her posture, and the way she seemed entirely unaffected by his performance. A flicker of unease passed through him, though he did not acknowledge it aloud. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano with measured steps, her gaze steady, her breathing controlled. The audience's chatter quieted as she seated herself, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She placed her hands on the keys, paused for a heartbeat, and began. The music emerged gently at first, soft and deliberate, carrying a subtle weight that drew listeners in. Unlike the pianist, she did not rush to impress or dominate the room. Her playing was natural, expressive, and full of intention. As the performance continued, the audience became completely absorbed. Each note was precise yet flowing, technically skillful yet full of emotion. Her fingers moved with confidence, her hands shaping the music as though it were alive, breathing with her. She varied the dynamics, softened the loud passages, and let the silences between notes speak. Every phrase carried meaning, a story unfolding in real time. People listened, enraptured, some closing their eyes to feel the music more deeply. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing alone. The long nights when the house was quiet and the world seemed to sleep. She remembered the times she had been told she wasn't good enough, that her talent would never be noticed, that she should keep her playing private. All of those moments had shaped her, built her resilience, and given her a kind of quiet confidence that few could see. She had learned to wait for the right moment, to prepare, to trust in her own ability to communicate something real through music. And so she waited. The pianist continued his performance, unaware that someone in the room was silently observing, learning, and preparing for a moment that might come unexpectedly. The energy in the room was thick with skill, confidence, and admiration. But there was also a quiet undercurrent of tension that only the perceptive could feel. That tension was born of possibility, the possibility that someone unexpected could step forward. Someone who had been underestimated. Someone who had prepared in silence. Someone whose music could shock the very people who believed they knew it all. The young woman shifted slightly in her seat, a small movement almost unnoticed by anyone. Her eyes never left the piano, never left the room, never left the moment. She was calm, patient, and focused. She was ready even if the world wasn't aware of it yet. In that room, filled with applause and admiration for one man, she was a quiet presence, a waiting force, a story yet to be told. And the evening, the performance, the arrogance surrounding her only made the moment she would have all the more powerful. The pianist finished the last piece of the evening, bowing again, smiling, and accepting praise. The applause was thunderous. People approached him, shaking hands, praising his skill, and sharing compliments that sometimes felt rehearsed themselves. He basked in it, clearly enjoying the recognition. The young woman remained in her seat, quiet and composed, untouched by the spectacle. She had seen enough, heard enough, and understood enough to know that this was not the end, but the beginning of something that could shift everything. And in that quiet, unnoticed corner of the room, she made a silent promise to herself. She would play. She would show. And when she did, it would be a moment no one would forget. The arrogance, the confidence, and the showmanship of the first pianist would meet something real, something unanticipated, and the room would change forever. The young woman left the performance that evening with a quiet sense of determination. The pianist had been impressive, no doubt, but his arrogance and the way he flaunted his skill left something missing, something she knew could be filled with real music. She walked slowly through the streets on her way home, the evening air cool against her skin. Her mind was full of thoughts, not just about the performance, but about her own journey and what it meant to truly play music, to communicate something beyond technique. She remembered the years she had spent practicing alone. Long nights when the house was silent, when the only sound was the soft hum of the lamp and the whisper of her fingers over the piano keys. She had faced discouragement more times than she could count. People had told her that talent wasn't enough, that no one would notice her if she didn't stand out, that she should aim for safe, predictable performances rather than risk showing anything deeply personal. Each of those words had stung, but they had also fueled her determination. They had made her practice harder, focus deeper, and search for a kind of music that came not from the applause of others, but from the truth in her own heart. The next few days were a blur of thoughts and rehearsals. She returned to her own piano, an old instrument she had inherited. Its keys worn and uneven in places, but it had character, a warmth that few modern pianos could offer. She practiced every day, not just technique, but feeling. She experimented with melodies, with tempo, with silence between notes. She learned how to let music breathe, how to let it tell a story rather than just impress. Every moment at the piano was a conversation, dialogue with herself, with her past, and with every emotion she had ever felt. Meanwhile, the arrogant pianist continued his schedule of performances. Everywhere he went, people admired him. He was praised for his speed, precision, and flair. His confidence grew with each performance, and so did his ego. He had no idea that someone in the audience had noticed the predictability behind his skill. To him, the world seemed full of spectators ready to admire and few, if any, who could challenge him. That confidence made him even less aware, even less cautious, and more convinced of his superiority. One afternoon, a local music teacher approached the young woman with an invitation. There was going to be a small, informal recital in a nearby hall. A chance for musicians to play in front of a supportive audience. The teacher mentioned the pianist by name, warning that he would likely attend and that the room would be tense with competition. The young woman listened quietly, her calm expression unchanged. She thanked the teacher and considered the opportunity carefully. She knew this could be the moment she had been waiting for. But she also knew it would not be easy. It would require her to be brave, to step out of the quiet comfort of her practice room and into the world where skill alone often spoke louder than feeling. She had to prepare, not just for the music, but for the presence of the pianist, for the audience, and for the weight of expectations that came with the knowledge that people would likely underestimate her. She understood that people might laugh, might doubt, might whisper about her ability, and she accepted it. She had learned long ago that doubt from others could be transformed into focus and strength. The days leading up to the recital were filled with careful preparation. She practiced from morning until late at night, each day refining the pieces she planned to play. She worked on tempo, dynamics, and expression. She imagined the audience in her mind, including the arrogant pianist, and she imagined playing for them not to compete, but to speak through the music. Each note became a sentence, each phrase a paragraph, and each piece a story. Her fingers grew more confident, more expressive, more alive with every repetition. At the same time, she noticed the way her own mind began to change. Practicing under pressure, imagining herself in front of the pianist, helped her recognize her own strength. She had been underestimated before, but she had never truly felt powerless. She realized that her skill, combined with emotion and patience, was a force that could not be ignored. The music she created was not about winning applause or outshining someone else. It was about expressing what had been hidden. It's about sharing the depth of her experience with the world. Finally, the day of the recital arrived. The hall was small, intimate, and filled with people who loved music. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and a modest stage held a polished piano waiting for its next performer. The young woman arrived early, finding a seat near the back to observe. Her heart was calm but alert. She watched other performers take their turns, some nervous, some confident. The atmosphere was full of anticipation, with conversations low and polite, occasionally glancing toward the stage. Then he arrived. The arrogant pianist entered with his usual confidence, his presence filling the room immediately. People stood to greet him, shook his hand, praised his talent, and welcomed him warmly. He nodded and smiled, acknowledging the admiration with the air of someone who was already certain of his place in the room. He did not notice the young woman at first, and she did not make herself obvious. She stayed quiet, observing, as she always did. When it was her turn, the teacher gave a small, encouraging nod. She rose, walking toward the piano with measured steps, calm and poised. People whispered softly, some glancing at the pianist, some curious about the young woman who seemed so unassuming. He raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk appearing on his face. Perhaps he assumed this would be easy, that the quiet presence in the corner would falter under pressure. She sat at the piano, taking a deep breath. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, feeling the weight of the instrument and the space around her. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, connecting with the music she had practiced so many times before. When she began to play, the notes were soft, deliberate, and full of intention. They weren't the fast, flashy notes of someone trying to impress. They were thoughtful, expressive, and alive with emotion. The audience shifted slightly, their curiosity piqued. They leaned forward, listening carefully, noticing immediately that this was not a typical performance. The music had depth and warmth. It carried a story that words could not capture. The young woman's hands moved with confidence, expressing joy, sorrow, hope, and reflection. Each phrase built naturally into the next. and each note seemed to resonate with a truth that could be felt in the chest rather than just heard with the ears. The pianist, for the first time, noticed something different. He paused mid-thought, his smirk fading slightly. The music unfolding before him was not just skill. It was life, it was feeling, it was connection. His hands twitched slightly, as if he wanted to intervene to assert his presence. But he realized quickly that this was something beyond mere performance. He had not prepared for this, had not anticipated the depth of expression she brought to the piano. The room was filled with a kind of quiet energy that felt almost alive. People whispered softly to each other, their eyes occasionally glancing toward the grand piano at the front. It was polished and gleaming, the kind of instrument that seemed to carry a promise before a single note was played. The evening had a formal air, with everyone dressed in their best clothes. Some faces were familiar from the local music scene, while others seemed like curious newcomers. Drawn by the reputation of the pianist who was about to perform, he walked in with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. From the moment he entered, he seemed to own the room, not just the stage. His suit was sharp, perfectly fitted, and his shoes gleamed as he moved. He carried himself in a way that said he was the best, and that everyone present should know it. When he smiled, it was faint, almost condescending, as if he knew secrets that no one else could hope to understand. People shifted in their seats, some impressed, some slightly intimidated. He approached the piano, his hands brushing over the keys casually, as though the instrument had been waiting only for him. A few murmurs floated across the audience. Everyone expected brilliance, but few realized how much of that brilliance came with a sting of arrogance. He settled onto the bench, straightened his back, and lifted his hands above the keys with a slow, deliberate motion. He didn't just play the piano. He made sure everyone knew he was in control, that this was his domain. Among the audience sat a young woman. She was easy to miss at first glance, sitting quietly near the back, her posture composed but unassuming. She wore simple clothes, her hair pulled back loosely, and she didn't have the air of someone trying to impress anyone. Her eyes, however, were focused and alert. They were the eyes of someone who had spent countless hours observing, learning and understanding music in a way that few could see. She wasn't there to show off or claim attention. She was there because music was part of who she was. As the pianist began to play, the room seemed to shift with him. His fingers moved across the keys with precision, producing notes that were technically flawless. The melodies were complicated and fast, a display of skill that made it clear why he had earned his reputation. People leaned forward in their seats, watching his hands, listening to the speed and clarity of every note. Some whispered to each other, impressed and slightly intimidated by the performance. He glanced at the audience occasionally, his gaze sharp and assessing, almost daring anyone to try to match him. The young woman listened quietly. She didn't need to lean forward or whisper. She didn't need to be impressed because she already knew that skill alone didn't tell the whole story. She could see the technical mastery, the confident rhythm, the showmanship. But she also noticed something else, something subtle. There was a certain predictability to the way he played. The music was impressive, yes, but it was formulaic. Every flourish seemed rehearsed to perfection, and every pause calculated. She could feel the emotion in the notes, but it was almost as if the emotion was being controlled rather than lived. Others in the room didn't see this. They were swept away by the speed and the accuracy, by the confidence and the drama. To them, he was untouchable. To them, it seemed impossible that anyone else could ever approach this level of mastery. Some nodded to each other, smiling in admiration, while a few others frowned slightly, trying to hide their envy. The young woman stayed still, her fingers resting lightly in her lap. She didn't need to react outwardly. She was observing, analyzing, and waiting for a moment that might come. A chance to show something real. As the performance continued, the pianist began to speak to the audience between pieces. His voice was smooth, confident, and commanding. He talked about technique, about the importance of precision, about the long hours he had spent practicing. Every word carried an undercurrent of pride, and some of it felt like a challenge. He looked around the room, his gaze landing briefly on the young woman. She felt his eyes, but she didn't flinch or react. He probably didn't even know she was there. But still, his eyes lingered for a moment. Perhaps sensing a quiet presence that he couldn't immediately categorize, he went on, speaking about other pianists, some of whom he had competed against, some of whom he had outperformed. There was a subtle arrogance in the way he described his achievements, a sense that he believed no one could ever truly match his talent. He smiled faintly at the audience, as if sharing a private joke only he fully understood. Some people laughed politely, swept up in the charm and confidence of his words. Others felt the tension in the room, a quiet awareness that he was both brilliant and intimidating. The young woman didn't react outwardly. She didn't need to. She was thinking about the piano itself, about the music, about the space between notes, about the energy that filled the room. She had been in many rooms like this before, where talent and confidence created a kind of pressure that could overwhelm even experienced listeners. She had learned to watch, to wait, and to recognize the difference between skill and artistry. The pianist had skill in abundance, but artistry, that was something else. That was something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in speed or applause. As he finished one particularly complex piece, the room erupted in applause. People stood clapping and cheering, some whistling softly. He smiled, bowed slightly, and allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. He had proven his point. He had shown that he was unmatched in that moment. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning for recognition, for admiration, for anyone who might challenge him, but found none. That was when his attention briefly returned to the young woman. She remained seated, calm, and composed, her hands folded lightly in her lap. There was no fear in her eyes, no awe, no flattery. Only focus, observation, and quiet patience. A few minutes passed, and the pianist moved on to another piece. This one was slightly slower, more dramatic, with long stretches of notes that demanded attention. He played with flair, exaggerating dynamics and pauses, ensuring that everyone noticed not just the music, but the performance itself. The audience leaned in again, caught up in the drama, in the showmanship, in the undeniable skill. The young woman listened, her head tilting slightly, her expression thoughtful. She noticed the calculated nature of his pauses, the almost theatrical emphasis on certain notes. It was all impressive, but it was also predictable. She could anticipate each turn, each flourish, each crescendo, without even thinking. Somewhere in the room, people began to murmur quietly among themselves. "He's incredible," one whispered. "I've never seen anyone play like this," said another. The applause was still loud, still enthusiastic, but there were whispers now of disbelief, of envy, of admiration mixed with something else, something that couldn't quite be put into words. The young woman noticed these reactions too. She understood why people were impressed, why they were intimidated. She also understood why some were waiting for something more, something real, something unexpected. The pianist ended the piece with a dramatic flourish, holding the final note longer than necessary, ensuring that the sound resonated through the room. The audience clapped again, some more loudly this time, some even standing. He allowed himself a small, confident smile. He had conquered the room, if only for now. His eyes swept across the audience one more time, searching, measuring, evaluating. He didn't notice that the young woman's eyes were calm, steady, unflinching. She was neither impressed nor intimidated. She was waiting. As the pianist stepped back from the piano, he turned slightly, addressing the audience with another smile, smooth and self-assured. "It's always important to push yourself," he said, his voice carrying easily, "to practice harder, to reach higher. Only then can you truly create something worth listening to." His words were met with nods, murmurs of agreement, and soft applause. People seemed to hang on his every word. Some even whispered to each other about his brilliance, about how fortunate they were to witness such talent. The young woman stayed in her seat, quiet and still. She didn't speak, didn't react, and didn't try to challenge him, not yet. She had been underestimated before, many times, and she had learned the value of patience. She had learned that there was a time to act, a time to reveal, and a time to let others show themselves before stepping forward. In that moment, she was simply observing, absorbing, planning. As the evening continued, other performers came and went, each with their own style, skill, and confidence. Some drew applause, some drew polite interest, but none seemed to capture the attention of the room quite like the first pianist had. People still talked about him in hushed tones during breaks, still glanced toward the piano as if expecting him to return. The young woman continued to sit quietly, her thoughts focused on more than applause or skill. She was thinking about what music really meant, about what it could do, and about the chance she might get.